Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Just 1 minute, 1 minute. There's some need to do. Okay. Now I can share the screen. Today I'll be able to only conduct the session till 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock I have some unavoidable service that has come up. So please bear with me today. Okay, Matha standards. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati took much risk in establishing the Gaudiya Mathas, not as hermitages, but as well-appointed interfaces between sadhus and the world. Proximity and accessibility to worldly people was meant to expose them to the saintly life, but it also exposed saintly persons to the temptations of worldly life and to the scrutiny of discerning people who are liable to misunderstand them as hypocritical enjoyers of the facilities at their disposal. Just a minute. While targeting the religious brigandry, let me open up my Merriam-Webster. For all these old words. While targeting the religious brigandry, groupism of persons lacking rectitude, of persons who are not righteous, who don't possess moral integrity. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was concerned that his own mathas not sink into moral paucity. They don't become immoral or self-contented laxity, or they become lax with their own attitude of being self-satisfied. You know, I'm happy, things are fine. And thus another edition of the vile, evil akras of those salacious, lustful pseudo-devotees who had marred, who had contaminated the name of Vaishnavism. Thus he strove to preserve the uprightness of Gaudiya Matha sadhus, that they actually be saintly and detached, for both their spiritual lives and the reputation of the institution hinged on it, was fully dependent on it. The asceticism implicit in the character of Srila Saraswati Thakur shaped standards for Matha life. He want as dalliance in bodily comfort increases, as you begin to play with various arrangements for bodily comfort, increasingly, proportionately, the spirit of service to the Lord wanes. In proportion to that, the desire to non-duplicitously, non-diplomatically serve the Supreme Lord will reduce. And thus, wanted Mathavasis to live simply amidst plenty, strictly observe rules of devotional life, and unhesitatingly perform any service required of them. Like most people in India at that time, generally Gaudiya Matha brahmacharis did not wear shoes. In eating, sleeping, traveling, and all other aspects of life, they were expected to be content with the bare minimum. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati severely reproved, criticized any disciple who was becoming overweight, was becoming fat, which often prompted the devotee thus criticized to fast until instructed to resume eating. This life of dedication was meant for satisfying the Lord of the Gaudiyas. Mahaprabhur Bhaktaganer Vairagya Pradhan Jahan Dekhi Pritohan Gaurav Bhagavan. Renunciation is the basic principle sustaining the lives of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's devotees. Seeing this renunciation, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becomes pleased. So if you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, you understand that what is considered to be a normal devotee is actually it's a very high standard. In my own observation, the one who is considered a good devotee in Bhagavad Gita is considered a neophyte in Bhagavatam. And the one who is considered a good devotee in Bhagavatam is considered a neophyte in Chaitanya Charitamrita. There are different standards. These are not some lofty ideals. If we start thinking like that, these are lofty, then these are basically attempts to try to convince ourselves that we really don't need these things. These are desirable but not essential. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur pointed out that if you want to go to Goloka Vrindavan, these are the standards. It's a payment for everything, and this is the payment. So this verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita, here you'll see the expression Vairagya, renunciation. This refers to both internal detachment and external renunciation. This verse, especially the first line, was often quoted by Matavasis to help fortify, to cement their commitment, or to caution a comrade slipping from the ideal. Although by the principle of Yukta Vairagya, devotees could employ opulence in service to the Lord, nothing was meant for personal indulgence. The apparent comforts accepted by Matavasis, while atypical for sadhus, were hardly luxuries. Yet, when Pranavananda Brahmachari's sister first visited him at Sri Chaitanya Math, she scolded him for having a bed and mosquito net. These were simply for preserving health, the bed being just some rude boards nailed together. But according to conventional understanding, even that was unsuitable for a sadhu, whose duty was to rest only on the floor, using at most a thin mat and minimal bedding. These are the standards that we can decide when to come to these standards. It's up to us, this life, next life, whenever, but these are the standards. Srila Saraswati Thakur reprobated, criticized excessive endeavors for material self-improvement, such as studying to become a great Pandit or performing much physical exercise. Rather, Matavasis were expected to engage from early morning till night in the 64 items of sadhana bhakti. This was something Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur repeatedly said. Those who were residing in the monasteries or the mathas, they were brahmacharis, separated vanaprasthas, or sannyasis. They were expected to become nirapeksha sadhakas, which means they have no material duties. They are not participants in even Vaishnava family lives. They are Graha Tyagis in Krishna consciousness. And therefore, their only duty is to engage in the 64 kinds of sadhana bhakti set out by Rupa Goswami and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, performing Kirtan, Archana, Parikrama of the temple, and Seva, and so forth. Red cloth was to be donned only by sannyasis and those brahmacharis committed to remaining celibate, and normally was not given to the latter until some years after Diksha. The Diksha of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in this context refers to what we have as second initiation, Gayatri initiation. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would decide which brahmacharis were eligible for such a difficult undertaking. And in a formal ceremony, he or a senior devotee would induct them into wearing red. Red means saffron. Although their bead bags would remain white, as was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's. red attire, being indicative of renunciation, was especially meant for preaching, to engender the natural respect accorded to renunciants that helped in communicating their message. Yet several brahmacharis and vanaprasthas who were regarded eligible for red cloth chose to remain in white, either due to involvement in management, for which a red cloth was deemed somewhat inappropriate, or out of personal desire to maintain a modest profile. Unless ordered to don secular clothing for a specific preaching purpose, every Mathavasi was expected to maintain traditional Vaishnava appearance at all times with tulasi neck beads and clearly visible tilak. Face and head were to be shaved at least once a month, with the shikha retained. Brahmacharis and sannyasis who went outside for preaching usually shaved more often, following the example of their Guru Maharaj, who generally kept his face clean shaven and had his scalp shaved monthly on Purnima. In accordance with Shastra, he and other Matavasis avoided shaving on the specific days cited in Shastra as inauspicious for so doing. Yet for some Matavasis, adhering to the strict regime was a struggle. Unable to give up his old habit, one Matavasi would sneak out to the Bagh Bazaar canal and smoke bidis, but inevitably would get caught. And some leading Matavasis preferred to maintain slick locks, neatly oiled and combed. Srila Saraswati Thakur never corrected them for that. But if other brahmacharis raised the subject, he would remark, they are Babu brahmacharis. Now, how do I translate that into English? Stylish brahmacharis, which is definitely not very helpful. Dynamism of the mathas. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was the first Gaudiya Acharya to establish mathas along the lines of those founded by Acharyas Shankara and Madhva as monastic seminaries with emphasis on scriptural training and also incorporating deity service. He had classes. Sometimes in some reports I've come across at least some of the Gaudiya Mathas. There were classes even during the day. Vedanta Sutra, Bhagavatam, different, very quite interesting it is. He exhorted Matavasis to take advantage of their good fortune, quoting, Mathanti vasanti yatra paramartha shiksharthinaha iti mathaha. Matha means a place wherein reside persons desirous to learn the ultimate purpose of life. He also wrote, Shiksha Mandire Naam Math. A temple of instruction is called a matha. So a matha is an educational center for renunciate sadhakas. He gave the analogy of the Gaudiya hospital. If I remember correctly, he wrote an article in the Gaudiya called Gaudiya Hospital also. He gave the analogy of the Gaudiya Hospital, wherein Harinam was the medicine and Mahaprasad the diet, and whose inmates were both to undergo and administer treatment. Notice that, whose inmates were both to undergo treatment and administer treatment. So we have simultaneously patients and assistant doctors. Let me say this one. Like in medical college. Internship. These mathas were not mere residential colleges or spiritual sanatoriums. Sanatorium. Let me get that out. An establishment of facility offering usually long-term medical care or treatment. So they are not just spiritual hospitals, just in that, but dynamic preaching bases formed in pursuance of a dictum of Srila Saraswati Thakur's own coinage that he frequently quoted. Prana cheta sehetu prachar. One who has a life can preach. He expected Madhavasis to be surrendered, dedicated, and detached, joining him in sacrificing their soul, their life, for establishing and spreading the mission. He did not want to be surrounded by obsessive sycophants, flaccid sentimentalists. Flaccid. That means lacking firmness, or sluggish procrastinators, lazy fellows, not to produce the kind of sedentary sadhus, the ones who simply sit in one place, who for fear of Maya retreat to mountain caves. He considered it insufficient that his disciples be cherubic sadhus. Innocent, chubby, rosy, angelic, or just we emanate positivity. Not just that. Properly speaking, the various steps of Bhakti Yoga are outlined in Upadeshamrita of Rupa Goswami, in essence. And we find the first two steps are all don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Negative. There's a place for positivity, there's a place for negativity. It is actually for our good that Rupa Goswami is speaking of this. Or mere panditas, simply studying, becoming scholarly. Not that, I need to do something by which the non-devotees and devotees will start respecting me. And I don't know what to do. Let me try out different things. If nothing works out, let me become a scholar. Then people respect me. Not like that. Or content simply with archana. He wanted men of backbone, active preachers like himself, ready to give their lives for propagating Shuddha Bhakti. He declared, I wish that every selfless, tender-hearted member of the Gaudiya Math be prepared to shed 200 gallons of blood for the nourishment of the spiritual body of every individual in human society. To recruit and train men of such caliber, Srila Saraswati Thakur persisted in speaking and writing, untiringly presenting scriptural conclusions hour upon hour, day after day. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati detested idleness, caprice, being whimsical, or lack of commitment, intolerant of careless or slipshod attempts. Careless, untidy attempts at service. He unceasingly pushed his disciples to surrender to Krishna at every moment by keeping them engaged in service and thus detached from material enjoyment. Prabhupada was also like this. He was also like this, pushing his disciples up to the maximum and quite at times beyond the maximum also. Comparing torpidity sluggishness, inertia, to dreaming of riches while lazing under a torn and tattered quilt. He exhorted his followers to be industrious and do something meaningful for the mission. He would refer to a shirker, one who evades the performance of an obligation. In Bengali, there's a word which is slipping my mind right now. Basically those who try to refuse at every opportunity anything which makes them very committed to study or preaching or practice, just the bare minimum. They're only interested in a just pass, borderline pass. They don't want anything more than that. You would often refer to a shirker, such just past cases, as a matua, Oriya for mutt resident, a common scurrility. An offensive, rude remark for loafers, useless fellow, with the insinuation that mutt inmates are a class of perennially languorous do-nothings. If you don't know what to do in life, you're a failure in everything, then you go and join a mattha. Weak people. He also spoke of mathamedhis. Now we hear about grihastha, we hear about grihamedhi. He also spoke about mathasthas and mathamedhis. He also spoke of mathamedhis, a play on the word grihamedhi, envious grihastha. Prabhupada has often spoken about grihamedhi. A grihamedhi is one who does not have Krishna consciousness as his first priority. Let me say like that. So similarly, a mathamedhi is one who resides in a monastic environment, but who does not have Krishna consciousness as the first priority. Thus indicating that one who lives in a monastery yet maintains the mentality of a householder. My personal, quite fallible opinion is that mathastha, then grihastha, then grihamedhi, and lowest is mathamedhi. Better to be a grihamedhi than a mathamedhi, actually. Srila Saraswati Thakur would keep his disciples busy in diverse services: archana, cooking, cleaning, typesetting, lecturing, writing, soliciting funds, all for the pleasure of Krishna. The mattha atmosphere was palpably focused and disciplined. Was very tangibly focused and disciplined, with no room for indolence, laziness, or complacency. Complacency is the attitude that I've done enough, I've preached enough, I've studied enough, I have practiced enough, I've done me. How much more do you want me to do? How much more what you want me to do, that is significant of a complacent attitude. My Guru Maharaj, Srila Jayapataka Swami Maharaj, he often used to say, complacency is a killer of utsaha. In Upadeshamrita, we come across this, utsahan nishchayat dhairya, enthusiasm. So this is the exact opposite of it. It kills that. Matavasis slept meagerly, rarely over 4 hours. All were carried along by the spiritual energy emanating from Srila Saraswati Thakur. There is no other explanation to a phenomenon like this. How can you sleep for 4 hours and just go on year after year after year for 18 years like that? 10 years, 18 years. It's just the Yoga Maya emanating from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's presence, who expressed his satisfaction with his disciples thus: because Sriman Mahaprabhu is extremely merciful, even in a place like Calcutta, he has kept many devotees. At the Gaudiya Matha, Calcutta. Gaudiya Matha was the Calcutta Bagh Bazaar, later Bagh Bazaar. There is always Harikatha, and everyone there is ever intoxicated with Hari Seva. By the Supreme Lord's mercy, I see in all the matters the inclination to serve the Lord, and I ponder Mahaprabhu's mercy. I think about Mahaprabhu's mercy, how I was previously passing my life enjoying material pleasures. But wherever I go today, I am granted the association of devotees and opportunity for devotional service. End of quote. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's general instruction to Matavasis was to daily go for bhiksha, fundraising, for a minimum of half an hour and visit at least 5 houses. He would say, go and repeat the message of Krishna, and while speaking, also hear it yourself, and thus become purified. Even if no one gives anything, At least people will see you and be reminded of our mission. But devotees with specialized engagements, particularly deity service, cooking, or publication work, were not required to go out. Srila Saraswati Thakur did not underplay the challenges of preaching. He likened dissemination of Lord Chaitanya's mercy to free distribution of first-class mangoes, which would find few willing takers and more likely invite suspicion and skepticism. He said that the genuine speaker of Harikatha will certainly be severely mistreated by materialists and sometimes even by demigods. This is actually even commonly understood in India by pious people, that when you try to focus on very serious sadhana, then the demigods sometimes will interfere and provide all kinds of material diversions with an overcoating of spirituality to divert a person, typically in the form of money, fame, woman, Vaishnavi. Everything is Vaishnava fame, Vaishnava, Krishna consciousnessable money, and so on. Nor did he uphold the artificial distinction generally made by Vaishnavas between bhajan and prachar, swapakar, paropakar. Rather, he stated that prachar is the natural kirtan of siddhas and is essential to the sadhana of sadhakas. Because if we enjoy nice fruit but don't desire to share it with others, then our own stock will decrease. For seeing our stinginess, the original source will cut our supply. He declared, Jeever viparit ruchi parivartan korai, sarvapeksha dayamai ganer ekmatra kartabba. The only duty of all merciful persons is to transform the contrary inclination of conditioned souls. The perverted inclination, which means we are right now inclined to not serve Krishna the way Krishna wants, to the extent Krishna wants, and that is a contrary inclination. To effect this, he wanted to create Goshtyanandis, not Viviktanandis. Viviktanandi means seclusionists. We commonly refer to them as Bhajananandis. To effect this, he wanted to create Goshtyanandis, preachers who cooperate within Lord Chaitanya's mission for increasing the number of devotees. See, the idea is this. We have Navavida Bhakti. And within Navavida Bhakti, we have Shravanam Kirtanam. That Kirtanam is what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur repeatedly says is preaching. The act of preaching is actually Kirtana, is part of Kirtanam. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did not approve of disciples giving up preaching to practice Nirjan Bhajan in imitation of exalted Bhajananandis. He posed, which place is Nirjan? Wherever I go, I carry my mental filth with me. In Vaishnava K, who is a Vaishnava? He rhetorically asked, Tushtamon, tumi kiser Vaishnav? Pratishtharatare nirjaner ghare tava hari naam kebal kaitav. Wicked mind, what kind of Vaishnava are you? Your show of chanting Harinam in a solitary place is for false prestige, simply hypocrisy. Therein he further exhorted, pushed devotees to preach, pointing out how the Nirjan Bhajan of inconsummate devotees, immature devotees, is conducted for prestige or in delusion. And that rather than adopting false renunciation, they should broadcast Shuddha Bhakti by utilizing Yukta Vairagya. That Gaudiya Math men unrelentingly preached to attempt others' uplift, yet in a manner certain to be often unpopular, was cited by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as indicative of their not desiring pratishtha, reputation. We want to be respected by non-devotees. We want to be respected by devotees. This is a desire for pratishtha. And Raghunath Das Goswami in Manashiksha has severely condemned the desire for pratishtha. He pointed out that individuals who sit quietly making a show of Nirjan Bhajan will not become objects of shafts. They will not be attacked, but of praise. They will be for praise. While those who unreservedly preach will not be popular, but subject to retribution and aggression. So those who properly preach the immaculate message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu coming through the Siddha Parampara, the disciplic succession of perfect pure devotees from Rupa Goswami down, naturally they will not be popular. His mathas were not meant to be bland, tasteless retirement homes for a few inmates to beg rice, cook, eat, and then sleep. He was firmly opposed to constructing temples in quiet places for leading a passive life, but instead stressed the need for potent outlets in the heart of cities for spreading Lord Chaitanya's teachings to the greatest number of people. When once asked, why are you establishing mathas amid the bustle of towns, within crowded environments of towns, since usually temples are built on hillsides or in undisturbed, cloistered spots, in undisturbed, secluded spots? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati answered, I'm not a Bhajananandi. I'm not a Viviktanandi. I'm not a seclusionist. I've come to cities so that the inhabitants thereof may have the opportunity to hear Hari Katha. And when a Gujarati admirer offered to build him a temple in Ville Parle, a quiet village near Bombay, he immediately refused. When some of his preachers returned from a scheduled meeting and reported that no one had come, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati replied, don't be discouraged. It doesn't matter if no one cares to hear. Speak anyway. At least the four walls will hear. Prabhupada also said this. Indeed, his disciples soon found no reason to be disappointed, for with many going daily door to door, their message gradually gained wide appreciation. Prabhupada also pointed out that in line with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's method, if we preach, initially people will ridicule, but then eventually they will accept. We have to be consistent, strict. I will even say stubborn to make spiritual progress, along with our steady, pleasant endeavors to preach. Both has to happen simultaneously. We have to be stubborn with ourselves and pleasant in our preaching endeavors, which should not stop. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati repeatedly stressed the importance of hearing and chanting. He wanted the Gaudiya Mathas to be temples of continuous kirtanas, not only singing, but discoursing on topics of Hari, studying scripture, typesetting and printing, and going out to preach and distribute books and magazines. He desired that one way or another, his followers always be busy in kirtan. Remember, kirtan. By kirtan, he is talking of preaching. All kinds of glorification of Krishna, and thus become purified. A matha surcharged with talk of Krishna's glories and service is non-different from Vaikuntha. Therefore, mathavas, residence in a matha, is dhamvas, is residence in the dham. Harikatha must be prominent in the math. There is no use in constructing maths merely to facilitate eating and sleeping. They need be built only for broadcasting Harikatha, which will benefit ourselves and others. End of quote. Srila Saraswati Thakur was concerned that his disciples properly understand and be convinced of Bhakti Siddhanta, the conclusions of Bhakti, for without unshakable faith based on clear comprehension, they neither advance in nor effectively propagate the devotional science. Vishuddha Vichar leads to Vishuddha Achar, which leads to Vishuddha Prachar. Immaculate, spotless understanding of Krishna consciousness can lead to spotless, immaculate implementation of Krishna consciousness in our own lives, and an immaculate, spotless dissemination of the same. Within the Gaudiya Matha, he deliberately cultivated an ethos of high intellectualism based on the spiritual principle of satisfying Krishna, distinct in essence from mundane scholarship. He specifically dubbed Sri Gaudiya Matha at Bagh Bazar the Vani Hatta, marketplace of spiritual instruction, just as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had revealed Godruma as the headquarters of Nityananda Prabhu's Nama Hatta. So the Nama Hatta was set up by Bhaktivinoda Thakur to spread the chanting of the holy names. It's a marketplace where you are distributing the holy name. Within that, you have the core, which is meant to be a Vani Hatta, where you have the marketplace of the detailed philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This two-pronged approach was there right from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time. When it came to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Prakashananda Saraswati, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Ramananda Rai, and similar great scholars, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu exhibited unparalleled scholarship, philosophy, detailed discussion. He has explained the Vedanta Sutra twice. Even though he didn't write a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained it twice. Once to Sarvabhauma, once to Prakashananda. So that shows, and it's not, it's a very, very intellectual work to deal with a thoroughgoing analysis of several Upanishadic passages that are found in Vedanta Darshan. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu demonstrated that. He refuted Mayavada not by some emotional way. It is not that he just embraced Sarvabhauma and out of love, Sarvabhauma changed his mind. Actually, Sarvabhauma, it appears that Sarvabhauma was also aware of, he was himself an impersonalist earlier. And there was Vyasatirtha in the Madhva line earlier to Lord Chaitanya, who had severely attacked Mayava. Vyasatirtha's books are still there. Severe attack. And our Vasudeva Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he was such a hard nut, even then he did not change. But when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained the Vedanta Sutra, seeing the superior intellectual force of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he accepted. So that is Vani Hatta. That is the power of rational, intellectual understanding. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur revived it. Bhaktivinoda Thakur revived this. Lord Chaitanya in general had Nama Sankirtan. That is his policy for the mass. And his policy for the class was detailed philosophy, thorough discussions. A small class, it's a minority. So Vani Hatta was for the class. Nama Hatta is for the mass. Both are required. Thus, the Gaudiya Mathas came to be admired even by ideological adversaries as loci of places of elevated philosophical discourse. The confidence radiating throughout the mission was upheld by the conviction that the presentation of Krishna Bhakti offered by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was wholly coherent with that given by Krishna, Vyasa, and all subsequent acharyas, and that other expositions of Vedic philosophy were either less complete or deviant. Moreover, the effervescent ambience of the Gaudiya Math, the bubbling enthusiasm of the Gaudiya Math was pushed on by belief in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's frequent statement that in the future its message would prevail throughout the world. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati worked hard to fulfill this aim and expected his disciples to follow his example, knowing well that increasing the number of disciples and mathas would proportionately increase his anxiety. He willingly accepted that burden as unavoidable in his service to the Parampara and dispatched his men far and wide to promulgate Gaudiya Siddhanta door to door. Being empathic with the difficulties undertaken by his disciples, he himself traveled extensively to outline matters, to give his personal association and to encourage the men posted in those places and to help boost their preaching efforts, and also to see that spiritual standards were maintained, often without prior notice. Srila Saraswati Thakur would tell a disciple to go here or there to perform a particular task. And should that devotee ask for time to prepare for his belongings, Srila Saraswati Thakur would retort, "Your baggage will be sent after you." go now. When a German devotee complained, Prabhupada, we are accustomed to planning our activities in advance, sometimes up to 3 months. So I need at least a week's notice to get ready. Saraswati Thakur responded, I get information 5 minutes before, so how can I inform you a week ahead? Prabhupada was also like this. He was in train and the train stopped by New Delhi, and there was one gentleman telling Prabhupada, you have centers in so many places, you must have a center in the capital of India. This is the capital of India. And AGS Prabhu, AGS Das, was sitting there. Prabhupada said, the American devotee. He said, okay, get down, see what can be done. That's all. He gave him some local life and those contact. But he just got down. That's all kinds of things. Even our Chidambara Mataji, she, Prabhupada disciple, Canadian or American, I don't remember. But she once told me that Prabhupada, she had a small daughter. She was with her husband. Everyone devotees, all three of them. And in America, Prabhupada just sent them off to India. They came to Gujarat. There were no centers there. Sent them off to some village in the middle of nowhere. Told them to do prasadam distribution, kirtan, book distribution, this, that. She said, I have lived under a tree. 3 of us, we have lived under a tree. Well, they did that. And Prabhupada said, okay, now you go to the Hyderabad farm. And this is a common report that you hear from various disciples of Prabhupada. Chapter 10, on tour. Mahanta swabhave tarete pamar, nija karja nahi tobhu jantar gha. It is the nature of saintly people to deliver the fallen. Therefore, they go to people's homes, although they have no personal business there. Bhavad vidha bhagavatas tirtha bhutas swayam vibho tirthi kurbanti tirthani swantasthena gada vrita. Saints of your caliber are themselves places of pilgrimage. Because of their purity, they are constant companions of the Lord, and thus they can purify even the places of pilgrimage. Srila Saraswati Thakur set the place in the preaching fight by leading from the vanguard, from the front. The forefront of an action, the troops moving at the head of an army. Following in the footsteps of Acharyas Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he undertook expeditions throughout the provinces of Bharatavarsha. Based in Bengal and Orissa, particularly Calcutta, Mayapur and Puri, he journeyed widely, combining formal and informal preaching with pilgrimage, research and side trips to places of general interest. As he noted, we go to Calcutta, Madras, Shillong, Mussoorie, Delhi, Lucknow, Dhaka, even village to village, introducing this message. What is the need for us to move around like world travelers from Kanyakumari to Himachal just to fulfill Mahaprabhu's prediction? So the prediction is there, but you need to fulfill it. The railway network developed by the British afforded unprecedented opportunities for widespread propagation all over the vast subcontinent. And Srila Saraswati Thakur was among the first sadhus to realize its potential, both by personal touring and by dispatching disciples on similar sorties. Sortie, a sudden issuing of troops from a defensive position against the enemy. Excursion, expedition, foray, raid, all of that is included. During the early days of the mission, he rode mostly in 3rd class, but after the Gaudiya Math was well established, in 1st class. In Indian Railways, we have 1st class, 2nd class. Like Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Saraswati Thakur would go to the station 30 minutes to an hour before the scheduled departure. He never journeyed alone, but usually with a group of devotees, taking along mridangas, kartals, books, cooking utensils, and other paraphernalia. Sajjan Maharaj and leaders like Ananta Vasudev Prabhu would accompany him in first class, while others rode in second or third class according to their rank. In later years, after the number of his disciples had swelled, increased, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's train journeys through Bengal and Orissa were regularly punctuated by receptions at several stations en route. Even in the middle of the night, devotees often enthusiastically assembled for a brief stoppage, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would stand in the doorway of the carriage to meet them. Sometimes, for daytime halts, a major welcoming ceremony would be organized with an exuberant kirtan party and leading local citizens present to greet him. He would deliver a short speech, thus prolonging the proceedings, but the railway staff and passengers rarely objected, for many of them also would become caught up in the devotional fervor. Such station receptions for prominent people were not uncommon, and it was widely accepted that all else could stop for the sake of religious expression, particularly at Cuttack, where Bhakti Sudhakar Prabhu would rally the numerous resident devotees for an especially rousing welcome. Frequently, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's train would be delayed for half hour or more. Srila Saraswati Thakur also went to uncounted places off the railway line, moving by car, horse cart, boat, palanquin, or foot. Journeys were often grueling, difficult, as for instance, when he and his ancillary disciples traversed many miles of rough tracks across densely forested hills to reach the remote Shiva temple at Mallikarjuna Tirtha. On his travels, he delivered formal lectures, discussed with scholars, visited religious and secular places of interest, became acquainted with local history, geography, socio-economics, and especially religious and social customs, and in some places investigated the feasibility of establishing a new matha. All of that is an example for us. This is how preaching is meant to be done. He often preached in villages, which in those days lacked urban amenities such as electricity, street lights, paved roads, mechanized transport, and contemporary education, yet wherein groups of cultured and scholarly persons, mostly Smarta Brahmanas of traditional schooling, lived harmoniously with earthy rustics. Earthy, worldly, country people. Being less sophisticated than city dwellers, Indian villagers tended to be more religious and enthusiastic to receive sadhus, and were delighted to have darshan of such an exalted saint. Our Padayatra party in India, they will give you the same description even now. Even now, India in the villages has a greater propensity, inclination towards religiosity and even spirituality. Throngs of people would converge on him, eager to touch his feet. Sometimes they became so wildly excited that his disciples would encircle Srila Saraswati Thakur to prevent the crowds from jostling him, disturbing him, or touching his feet. Especially in early life, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati regularly visited his family estate in Choti Mangalpur, Orissa, which had been wholly bequeathed upon him by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. The first landlord had been Sri Krishnananda Datta, a devotee of Nityananda Prabhu. While staying there, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati collected rental dues and worshipped the family deities of Jagannath and Shalagram Shila in accord with the prohibition that sannyasis cannot enter their father's home. After accepting sannyas, he would stay in the Doshera Mandap. Must be the same as Durga Mandap, pavilion for worship of Durga, and pace to and fro chanting japa in the large open space in front of the house. Puri, 1918. On 10 June 1918, accompanied by 23 disciples, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati set out for Puri on his first pilgrimage cum preaching tour after accepting sannyas. The first stop was at Shiuri Prapanashrama. Prapanashramas were set up by Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself earlier on. These are all places where they were centers, you can say they were centers. The first stop was Shiuri Prapanashrama, and next at the remote settlement of Kuamar, Mayurbhanj, on the invitation of the headmaster of the local junior school who had received Harinam from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. The party was met outside the township by an exuberant kirtan group of over 100 members. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati inaugurated another Bhaktivinoda Asana in Kuamara. After 2 days, they set out for Remuna. The 14-mile trek over hilly forest terrain was made even more cumbersome by the new monsoonal rains, which, apart from intermittently soaking the wayfarers, had also created thick mud, slippery paths, and innumerable unbridged rivulets. Undeterred, the devotees chanted as they trudged along. On their arrival, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and his cortege and his associates were joyfully greeted by the inhabitants of Remuna, headed by the proprietor of the famous Shirachora Gopinath temple, and provided lodging. But the only food available was coarse flat rice and gritty molasses. Good. Okay. Which the party washed as well as possible, offered to the Lord, and then honored as prasad. After being shown the important sights in the area and attending the Arati of Gopinath, later that evening, the group finally received full plates of Mahaprasad, including the famous Kheer offered to Gopinath. The next day, 17 June, the contingent hiked 6 miles further to Balasore, where they were welcomed by the subdivisional magistrate, Rai Sahib Gaurshyam Mohanty, and other distinguished persons of the town. Preparations for their stay and preaching had been made by Sri Nitya Sakha Mukhopadhyay, who ostensibly was a follower of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who claimed to be a follower of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was said to be a follower of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Nitya Sakha was known as a lover of literature and a competent writer. Many of his articles had been featured in Sajan Toshini. An enthusiastic host, he had scheduled a yatra performance at his home as part of the festival occasioned by this visit of a Vaishnava Acharya. Nitya Sakha Babu repeatedly entreated Srila Saraswati Thakur to attend, insisting that no devotee would object to such a sacred religious function. Srila Saraswati Thakur responded, "Truly spiritual sounds cannot issue from the mouths of those who have not sincerely taken shelter at the lotus feet of a bona fide guru, nor from those whose every endeavor is not for the transcendental sense pleasure of the absolute truth. By satisfying the senses of envious non-devotees, pretenders may gain a modicum, get a little dose of petty fame and thus feel their own senses gratified. But all this has nothing to do with Shuddha Bhakti, which is based on the genuine attempt to realize the teachings of an authorized guru. We don't want Jatra Chaitanya. We don't want Chaitanya of a drama. We want real Chaitanya. We want the real Chaitanya Mahaprabhu." Further indication of Nitya Sakha Babu's deviant tendencies came at meal times, when the Gaudiya devotees witnessed him and a friend pushing into each other's mouth morsels of food from their own plate, a practice typical of Prakrita Sahajiyas. On 19 June, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati addressed an extensive gathering convened in a park by the local Haribhakti Pradayini Sabha. He spoke on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shikshashtaka and dilated on, and he spoke in detail about Shuddhanam, pure chanting, Namabhas, chanting the reflection of the holy name, and Namaparaj, chanting the holy name with offenses. As usual at such programs, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati also had some of his disciples lecture and perform kirtan. Afterward, the organizers requested the party to take the donations that had accumulated on a large plate at the front of the podium. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati told his disciples to politely decline, lest they be seen as having accepted payment for kirtan. This meeting was attended by all the important people of the town, many of whom visited Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati for personal guidance, a personal audience and spiritual guidance during his stay, and later assembled at the railway station to see him off. While in Balasore, upon seeing a beautiful young boy, Srila Saraswati Thakur became overwhelmed with love of Krishna, just as Lord Chaitanya had upon seeing an adolescent prince. Gradually restraining his ecstasy, he recited the verses of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita describing that pastime. Quote, the prince, just entering upon his youth, was very beautiful. He was blackish in complexion and had large lotus eyes. He was dressed in yellow cloth, and there were jeweled ornaments decorating his body. Therefore, anyone who saw him would recall Lord Krishna. Seeing the boy, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately remembered Krishna. Meeting the boy in ecstatic love, the Lord said, here is a great devotee. Upon seeing him, everyone can remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, the son of Maharaj Nanda. While proceeding by train to Cuttack, Saraswati Thakur saw a herd of calves grazing at the foot of the Nilagiri hills. As he often did when beholding pastoral or sylvan scenes, he recited, when he saw forests or such pastures, he recited, Bon dekhi bhram hoy ei Vrindavan, Shaila dekhi mane hoy ei Govardhan, Jaha nadi dekhi taha mano ye Kalindi, Mahaprema veshe nache Prabhu pode kandi. Observing the forest, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took it to be Vrindavan. He considered every hill Govardhan and every river the Yamuna. In overwhelming ecstatic love, he danced and fell down crying. End of quote. In Krishna Prema, one constantly remembers Krishna. And almost anything that can remind him of Krishna and Krishna's name, form, qualities, pastimes, above, overwhelms them. Then he quoted, Jaha jaha netra bode taha Krishna spure. Wherever the eyes fall, Krishna becomes manifest, indicating that the Mahabhagavata sees Krishna everywhere. He explained that everything is related to Krishna and is meant for his service, and that through this pastime, Lord Chaitanya demonstrated how upon seeing any object, a devotee remembers Krishna. Instead of trying to enjoy the beheld items, instead of trying to enjoy the items that are seen, the devotee regards all that he sees, and indeed everything in the world is meant for Krishna's pleasure. Srila Saraswati Thakur stayed 2 days in Cuttack, honoring an invitation by Devan Bahadur, Sri Krishna Mahapatra, to stay at his home and speak on the Bhagavatam. Upon arriving at Bhubaneswar station on the morning of 22 June, Srila Saraswati Thakur led the party in offering Dandavat to Lord Shiva, the presiding deity of the city, the Bhubaneswar temple. He cited a verse addressing Lord Shiva as Gopishwar and begging him for love of Krishna. That morning, the devotees visited the most important pilgrimage sites in Bhubaneswar, namely the temples of Ananta Sarovar and Lingaraj and the Bindu Sarovar lake. After honoring Mahaprasad at midday, they boarded a train for Puri. En route at Sakshi Gopal station, Srila Saraswati Thakur again led his party in offering Dandavat, this time toward the direction of the Sakshi Gopal temple. 6 o'clock. I have some service now. If you have any questions, I would request you to ask me in the Telegram group. You should stop with some other service that's waiting for me now. Please tolerate this inconvenience. Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.